So, might have to wing it here if it's too windy, but I'm Cattinson, aka Cat Robot. I'm a musician, writer, and detransitioned woman. I also recently earned a Bachelor's of Science in Molecular, Cellular, and Developmental Biology.
Nice.
Thank you. I'm a board member of a new nonprofit, Detrans Help, which is dedicated to helping detransitioners access medical care, informing the public about the serious health dangers inherent in gender medicine, and spreading awareness about the growing phenomenon of detransition. I am here to urge the Pediatric Endocrine Society to look deeper into the practice known as gender-affirming care, as this care significantly deviates from established medical and therapeutic practices. Its use is justified with ideology rather than sound evidence, and it has an immense potential for harm, especially when initiated in childhood or adolescence. In kindergarten, I went through a phase where I wanted to be a mermaid. I loved water so much, and I learned to swim when I was just 2 years old. I believed that if I could live and breathe underwater, that I'd be happy. One day, I was invited to a birthday party at a pizza parlor where there would be a magician performing. The day of the party, I could barely contain my excitement. I was going to ask the magician to turn me into a mermaid. The logistics of getting me to the ocean were a bit murky, but I was ecstatic at the thought of finally embodying the amphibious form I coveted. So at the party, I interrupted the magician's card tricks to request the mermaid transformation. He brushed me off with a joke, but I was insistent. As you can imagine, things quickly became awkward. Not today, the magician said with a smile. At the end of his performance, I was crushed. I had been ready to start my new life in the sea, but instead I was resigned to being the socially awkward, eccentric, short kid who was frequently bullied. But what if the magician had affirmed me as a mermaid? What if he had told me that with a few surgeries and a lifetime of injections, I could breathe underwater and communicate with the sea creatures like I desired? Would this have been the kindest thing for him to do? Gender identity advocates often instruct us to be kind, but what does it truly mean to be kind? Kindness does not mean agreement nor compromising one's principles to grant another person fleeting happiness. Ordinarily, when caring for children, we know that we cannot simply give them whatever they ask for. Sometimes we must make decisions that are in their best interest, even when those decisions may upset them in the present moment. Not long after requesting to be a mermaid, I asked my mom if it was possible to become a boy. This was after I had seen a young boy walking outside with his father shirtless and knowing I wasn't allowed to do the same. It was after watching TV shows and movies where all the characters I related to were male. It was after feeling that I had to dress a certain way and keep my hair long to be a girl. It was after I was constantly teased, dismissed, and talked down to. I constantly felt emotionally and sometimes physically unsafe, and I was unable to protect myself. I was lucky that I was born in the 90s, a few years too early for gender-affirming care. As a child, when I experienced gender confusion, no one in my life affirmed me as the opposite sex. At 13, I discovered a website for female-to-male transgender people and began attributing the mental illness I experienced to gender dysphoria. I believed I had a male brain in a female body. At 17, my parents took me to a gender therapist who ignored my many comorbidities, instantly accepted my self-diagnosis of gender dysphoria, and began referring to me with he, him pronouns. After our third appointment, he suggested to my parents that I begin injecting testosterone. My parents, having believed this therapist was an expert who would help me work through my issues rather than push me towards an irreversible path, were taken aback. They did not agree with the therapist's verdict, and thus I was forced to make it to adulthood without poisoning my body. Although I later made the decision to begin injecting testosterone as an adult and have since detransitioned, I am grateful I was not allowed to bypass natural puberty with the aid of drugs like Lupron, a powerful substance that has been used to chemically castrate sex offenders, has never been through clinical trials in the context of treating gender dysphoric children, and has both known and unknown serious side effects. I am grateful that I was not offered a double mastectomy before my breasts were even finished growing, as is currently happening to more and more minor girls who receive gender-affirming care. In light of the abysmal quality of science supporting these experimental practices, it is mystifying that medical organizations like the Pediatric Endocrine Society and the American Academy of Pediatrics currently endorse these practices, despite the changing guidelines in European countries such as Sweden, Finland, the United Kingdom, and France. All these countries have either banned or heavily restricted medical transition in youth. As a detransitioner who now suffers from chronic pain as a result of gender-affirming care, I urge pediatricians supporting this practice, which in reality is a widespread medical human experiment, to take a second look at the science underpinning this care, particularly when it comes to young people with still developing brains and bodies. I urge them to read past the abstracts, and you will find a litany of methodological flaws that nullify the conclusions of most studies underpinning youth medical transition. I implore you to, as medical doctors, use your expertise to examine these studies and the entire practice of gender-affirming care critically, rather than simply defaulting to WPATH's self-declared standards of care. Doing so could save tens of thousands of children and young people from irreversible, horrific bodily harm. Thank you.